So this is the roadmap that I explained last time. So today we will start our focus on our first block, which is HTML, to create our web pages. Before that, I just want to draw your attention that we will be using GitHub for delivering the course content and for you to deliver your assignment and your project. So, any of you already familiar with GitHub? Okay. Those of you not familiar, we will learn it as we move forward. This is a very important piece of technology that allows collaborative development of software projects. And just to show you the importance of this one, if I just go to GitHub, and I'll just say GitHub, it was purchased recently by Microsoft for just $7.5 billion. So just to show the importance of this piece of software as a core that enables collaboration between developers working on a particular software development project. So this is an opportunity for us to learn it at the same time, make it easier for us to share, for me to share with you the course content and keep it up to date, and for you to deliver your assignments and your projects. And I will introduce its features gradually as we move forward. But today I just want to give you a glimpse of what you can do with it. First of all, just to give you an idea, so we might have, let's say, several developers working on the same project, and they need to collaborate. When I say need to collaborate, maybe they will need to edit and add some. In a professional world, you cannot afford to waste time synchronizing files and keeping track of them, keeping track of who changed what and when and why they did the change. So that's why we have some central repository. In this case, one way of doing it is through GitHub, where all team members, they basically read and write files. Whenever I have some change, or I create new files, I push them to GitHub, and then the other team members, they can synchronize and download my changes. And if we were working on the same file, those changes will get merged. This is a simple idea what GitHub is, but it's much, much more.
It also shows changes.
Yes, you can see track the changes, who did what and when. You can also revert back to previous version. And the minimum, you have an online backup. If something goes wrong with your local environment or you lost your laptop, you always have terms. It's a collaborative environment where developers can collaborate and share content and do collaborative editing to deliver particular software project. It's heavily used, widely used, very, very common. And that's why we will be using it in this course. Okay, so let me just give you a glimpse about how we will be using it. So in our case, what I did, I went ahead and created an organization in GitHub. This organization is called CMPS 356S19. This is our organization. Within an organization, you will have repositories. In practice, an organization, they might have different projects or different applications they are maintaining. For each project, they will have a repository. And this repository will have all the files and documents and source code related to that particular project. So in this case, I created one first repository, which is called content. In here, I'll be posting all the slides and demos and later on projects and so on. And then I'll be asking you this week that you will create, I'll send you an email with all the details. You will create an account on GitHub, and then you will let me know the account name. I will tell you how the account name should be named. And then I will create a private repository for you within this organization. You will have one private repository and another one for your group project. The private repository is only visible for you and myself and the lab instructor. And the group repository, only the group members will see that repository. You don't need to pay anything. It's free for academic use, and all the repositories will be within this repository, so it's within this organization, so it is under my control. So the way it works, when you have, let's say, a lab assignment or a lab activity, you will push your work to your private repository, and then on the deadline, me or the lab instructor will download your version. So there's no actual submission. As you work, you push your work to GitHub. On the deadline, we just download your work. Then we grade it, and then we post some feedback back to your repository. Okay, so everything is through GitHub. No emails, no email submission accepted, no Blackboard submission, everything through GitHub. And this is how it works, professionally how it works. Okay, so just to get started, this is the first repository where I'll be posting content. What this repository is called? CMPS 356 content. So if you go there, you will already see two folders there, lectures and examples. So in every lecture we will cover, we will have the conceptual lecture and you will have associated example. And then as I explained last session, you will practice as we go in the lab. So that's how it works. And I just remind you again, this is a very practical course. It will rely on building skills as you move forward. It's not just conceptual understanding, it's building skills. Okay, so this is how you get started. You will go to this URL. This is already posted on Blackboard. You go to this URL. One way of getting started is you go ahead and download what is known as GitHub Desktop. Okay, you go ahead, you go here, you download this GitHub Desktop. There is one for Windows, for Mac, for other operating system. Once you download it and install it, you'll get something like this, with this purple kind of cat icon. You open it, and then whenever you are interested in a repository such as this one, all you do, you go ahead and say, you click on here and don't download, you say clone. So what clone means, it will create a copy in your local computer in a certain folder that you choose yourself. And then from time to time, let's say before you do a revision or before you want to go through the latest slides and examples, all you do, you go to that particular repository and then you do fetch. You click this one to synchronize. Whatever I have posted, you will see them. As I post things, you will see them. So, and as I showed before, so far, since the start of this course, I have done 3 pushes or 3 commits. One 3 days ago, and one just 1 hour ago. And you can see here, it keeps track of who did what and when and so on. So through this repository, we can also see who is contributing and what they have done. You can see all the commits this person has done. Yeah, and through here you can also see the free riders, the team members. They don't do much. You can detect them here very easily. Okay, so let me show you, for example, a real project, a real life project such as Vue.js. This library we'll be using later on. This is an open source project. By the way, most of the open source projects are available on GitHub, and people use GitHub to collaboratively develop these software components. So in here, you can see here we have 252 contributors. 252 people have changed and added and contributed to this project. And if you click there, you see the top contributor is this guy, which is he's the owner of this project. And you can see how many commits he did. Go and download GitHub Desktop, download it, install it. Then come to this repository, the URL already posted on Blackboard. Go here and clone it, because I already cloned it. Let me try to clone, for example, this one, just to show you the experience. If I clone here, I say here, open in desktop, it will ask me, here is the repository I am trying to clone, and here is where I want to put it. I can select another place where I want to put it. So if I say clone, what will happen? Basically, the copy of the repository will be downloaded. And then not only a copy is downloaded, there is a link between my local copy and the remote copy. And anytime I can come and click the sync to synchronize them. Let us start with our first topic, HTML. So first thing is we will see what HTML is and what we can do with it. So there are two major skill sets. There is front-end development and back-end development. So the front-end development, we have three major technologies that we must be familiar with and we must learn and practice. What are these three technologies? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These are the three very important technologies that we need to learn. And first thing is we need to understand what is the role of each one. What is the role? Before you dive into the how, you need to understand what do we use each one for. Okay, so basically to create or design web pages, also known as documents. Okay, so it will allow us, specifically, it allows us to create a structure of the page. Structure of the page. You know, when you create a report, let's say, I'm sure in all courses you might have submitted a report. So when you write a report, do you just open your editor and start typing, or do you give it some kind of structure? Structure. You give it some structure. So what do we mean by structure? Very good. Yeah, you might have like a title. You might have. You will like step back and think, what are the various sections I will have? What could be the header of each section? Maybe a section becomes too big and too complex. I'll break it down into subsections. And each subsection will have its own header. And then the subsection will have some paragraphs and so on. So I'll break down my document into sections, and then sections have headers, and sections have, within them I find paragraphs and so on. So basically my document will have some kind of structure. Plus within the document, sometimes I might have some images, I might have some graphs, some tables, and so on. All of this, why I'm doing all of this? Why can't I just open my document and start typing my ideas? Why I'm putting... Very good. This is very important for making it easier to read, to understand, to edit. We can even make it as a way to plan that document. If we are collaboratively working on the document, I can say, okay, Ali will take care of this section one, Ahmed will take care of section 2, and somebody else will take care of conclusion, for example. Yeah. So this is very important. That's how we work when we are dealing with text. We don't just bring text and dump it into some documents and give it to others. We always define some kind of structure. And that's what HTML allows us to do. It allows us to define the structure of our web page. Okay, what about CSS? What CSS is for? Very good, it's for styling. What I mean by styling? Very good, it's for formatting. Formatting the page, beautifying the page, making it look professional, making it look nice, making it look like more user-friendly, and so on. Again, all of this is to enhance the understandability and the clarity of the message. It's all about clarity of the message and making it easier for people to get into what they are looking for very easily and to make sense of the page much easier and to give them that good, pleasing user experience. Okay, and here, as you mentioned, this you could be defining the font, the colors, whether it's bold, italic, the alignment, whether it's in the middle, on the right, on the left, and so on. The positioning of the elements and so on. What about JavaScript? So this is all about client-side interaction, such as, what do we mean here? What can we use it for?
Dynamic page updating.
Yes, as we discussed before, it could be partial page updates. I gave you the example before. You might have a drop-down for countries, a drop-down for cities. When you change the country, the cities get repopulated with the cities related to the country you have selected. It could be some validation on the form. It could be some animation and so on. Okay? So these two are not really programming languages. This one is a markup language. I will explain what it means. And this one is a styling language. And this one is the only programming language in the mix. This is where you can define logic. When I say programming language, back to what you have learned. You will have variables, if statements, loops, and you can define logic. You can define some kind of computation that will take place on the client side. These two guys, the first two, are not programming languages. This is the only programming language. So now, on the client side, when the page comes down to the browser only understands these three things, nothing else. These three things, you need to learn them because the browsers of the world, the Chrome, Firefox, and the Edge, and so on, all of them, that's what they understand. And these languages are standardized. They are the same. You can find all the details about them on the web. If you want to build a browser is nothing but a piece of software that is able to understand HTML, able to understand CSS, able to run JavaScript. Yeah? And these are the technologies we use to build our web pages. And then the challenge here is we cannot just rely on one of them. Is that three of them are, these days in practice, they are a must. Unless if you want to just be a web designer with very limited opportunities, especially lately, where you can just stop at HTML, CSS. But this course is all about, remember, this is software development of enterprise applications. So our focus will be more on the development. These are just prerequisites that we need to quickly get familiar with. So I hope this is clear, yes? Okay, so let's move forward. Before I get into this, before we get into the details of HTML, the first thing we need to ask ourselves, before you learn any of these technologies, the details of them, or the how, before you dive into the how I use these technologies, you should ask ourselves what we can use them for. What are the capabilities, what they are used for. Then once we get that understanding, then we can dive into each what and say how we can achieve it. So what we can use HTML for. So you see here, I have something called header 1. And I want to tell the browser, oh, by the way, this is a header in my document. This is a header 2 in my document. This is a paragraph in my document, and so on. So that's what I mean by markup. I am telling the browser what is the role of each piece of content in my page. Is it a header? Is it a paragraph? Is it a table? Is it an image? So that's what I mean by markup. I basically kind of highlight part of the document and say to the browser, oh, this is a header. This is a paragraph, and so on. And what the browser will do, will take this text and visualize it. Another keyword we use here, the browser will render the page. Render, that's a keyword we have to be familiar with. Rendering the page. What do we mean by rendering the page? Visualizing the page. So if I go ahead and render the page, can you see here? I render it in Chrome. You can see the header 1. The browser understood that header 1 is an H1 tag, so it displayed it in this way. Yeah, it displayed it in bold and bigger font, and it gave some space before and space after. And I told the browser that this is header 2. That's why I made it bold, but it's smaller than header 1. You see what I mean? I told the browser that this is an image. So the browser went ahead and displayed it as an image. I told the browser that this is a link. The browser went ahead and displayed it as a link. So in markup language means I take the content of the page, put them inside tags, and these tags are they are nothing but instructions to the browser to what to do with this text that I'm giving to the browser. You get the idea, yeah? So the first thing I can do with HTML, I can create the page structure. Another way of saying it, another term of saying this, the page layout. Yeah. So typically the page might have a header, it might have a footer, it might have paragraphs, and so on. So basically collecting input from users. That's what you want to say, yes? Collecting input from users. What do we use to do this? Forms, thank you very much. That's it. This is one of the major capabilities of HTML, and this is very, very important for us as developers. Because the structure in the page, this is something even web designers can do. For us as developers, this is one of the most important capabilities because it allows me to collect input from users, then I submit it to the server, or maybe save it in a database, or do some computation, and so on. So this is one of the skills that you will be learning and spending a lot of time on this. You know, in many pages, sometimes we find something like this. Data organized in tables. So HTML allows us to display data in tables. What else we find? What else we can do with HTML? We can also display images, audio, video. In general, we can display media files. Okay? So these are the key capabilities of HTML. I can define the page structure. I can display data in tables. I can create forms to collect input from users. I can also display media files, could be images, audio, video, and so on. There are other more advanced capabilities that we will not be covering in this course. You can even use it to make drawings, to design and develop games, and so on. Much more advanced capabilities. But these are the major ones. It's clear? What can we do with it? So, once we understand these key capabilities, these are the key capabilities of HTML, then we start diving into it and defining how we can do each one. And here, when I say how, we need to learn the tags, the major tags that HTML has to allow us to achieve these functionalities. So before I do that, let us just go back one more step and just define what really HTML itself is. So HTML is nothing but a text doc. It's a document that is plain text. It's not binary or it's not compiled or anything. It's just plain text. And this text is made up of what we find in HTML documents. Tags. Thank you. Tags. Yes? Now, the whole document is, we put it in one root tag, which is the HTML. So you can think of an HTML document as a tree. It has the root, then it has branches, and these branches might have sub-branches, and so on. So it's a tree, basically. So the root of the tree is HTML tag. It's not me who defined this. This is the HTML inventors. Yeah? They define these tags, and each tag has a role to play. And the browsers understand, when you build a browser, you are building nothing but an interpreter of HTML. It can understand HTML and do what HTML document is asking the browser to do. Okay, so the first thing, when I create an HTML document, the first thing I open HTML tag. This is how I open the tag. Using this less than, greater than, and I put here the tag name. And I should not forget to close it. Yes? This is the root. Now the first two child of this root is the head and the body. Any HTML page you go through in the world, you will find this, the root element is HTML, then you have the head section, and then you have the body section. So now what do we find in the head section? Sorry? Very good, the title. By the way, this is the only thing visible to the user from the head. The others are not visible. Okay, what else? We find the title, very good. What else we find in the head?
Link to the CSS files.
Yes, remember that HTML is the page. I might need some styling file to format the page. So I add a link to the CSS file in my HTML page in the head. We will see how to do this. In my page, I might be using some JavaScript. I link this JavaScript file to my HTML page. Where do I do this linking? In the head. I might add some what is known as meta tags. These are good for search engines. When the search engine goes and discover your page, it might go to this meta tag and it shows the description of the page. So you know when you do search in Google, you get the link and you get some small description. Most likely this description has been extracted from this tag called meta, and the name is description and then the description of the page. Yeah? So this is what the role of the head. What about the body? What do we find in the body?
The actual content.
The actual page content. Thank you very much. It could be headers, it could be paragraphs, links, images, tables, forms, and so on. Is clear? So to summarize, an HTML page is a set of tags. All these tags must have a root tag. What is the root tag in an HTML document? HTML. And then within the root, we find two childs. What are these two childs? The head and the body. In the head, what do we put? Titles, some metadata, links to CSS, links to JavaScript. And then what we put in the body? The actual content of the page. Okay? So these are some common example tags that you will find in most HTML pages. You might have header tags, as I explained before. We have 6 header tags that HTML defines, H1 to H6, depending how, usually these are not for formatting, by the way, although the browser has some default formatting, but the idea of the tags is not really, the purpose of the tags is not really to define the format. What do we use to define the format of the page and to style the page is the CSS. Basically, these headers is basically saying to the browser the role of each piece of content on the page. What is the role of this text? This is a header. This is a subheader. This is a sub-subheader. This is a paragraph. This is another paragraph. So it's telling the browser the role of each piece of content on the page. Now, of course, the browser has built-in format, default, out of the box, a default format. But that format, we can change it. How do we change the format of these elements? Through CSS. By the way, be careful, HTML has went through many versions. The latest version is HTML5, and that's what we will be focusing in this course. And HTML has some tags that can influence the format of the tag, can change the format of the tag. Please don't use them. Those are for backward compatibility. They are left there from previous versions. New versions, you never use HTML for formatting. You use HTML to define the elements of the page and the role of each element. You put the formatting in CSS, and that's what we'll be covering later on. Okay, so let's move on. So the first, as I mentioned, these are the key capabilities. We will start now going through each one at a time. So the first thing we can do with HTML is I can define the logical structure of the page, what the page structure looks like. So for each capability, there are tags that will help me to do this. So here is how I define the layout of the page. By the way, in most pages, when you visit them, you will find many of them has this type of layout. You might have some header, some navigation bar, like some menu kind of, some articles with paragraphs and sections, and then some aside, some kind of advertising maybe on the right or something like that, and some footer. This is a typical structure of most pages. So HTML, particularly HTML5, define tags where you put those sections of the page. So if you want to have, let me give you a concrete example. Like let's just take an example. Let's say Al Jazeera, for example. You see here, for example, this could be a header. This whole thing is a header. And it has a navigation bar and an icon. And then it has many articles. Within these articles, I find sections, titles, and paragraphs, and images, of course. So you see here, the page is made up of many, many articles. And then towards the end, I have a footer. You can see here. Yes. So the footer might have some more links, usually some contact details, some Facebook link, Twitter link, and so on. A very common structure. So this is the logical. What I mean logical, it's not these tags that I'm trying to explain here do not define the physical positioning of these elements. How do we define the physical positioning? CSS. So, for example, I might have a navigation here, nav bar. I might put it on. If I want, I might put it on the left side or on the right side, or I might put it on the footer if I wish. Not very common, but let's say. So the actual physical positioning is not controlled by HTML. The physical positioning of these elements is controlled by CSS. Now, this is not a must. You can basically divide your lazy developers. They divide their page using some common tag called a div. A div is just a section of the page. Most lazy developers, they use div. They just divide the page into different divisions, and they put each part of the page inside a tag called div. But when HTML5 came, it told us, please try to be more meaningful, try to use more meaningful tags, okay, to allow much smarter user experience and allow browsers to take advantage of the meaning that you embed in your page. So basically, if you have a set of tags that are used for navigation, take that's part of the page and put it inside the nav. Instead of putting it inside the div, put it inside the nav bar, a nav tag. If you have an article, if your page is made up of many articles, each article put it inside an article tag. So let me maybe make this much clearer through an example. Here's the layout, page layout 1. Let me just quickly show you this, how it looks. So by the way, when you look at these examples, first try to run them, see how they look, and then go through and see how they are done. Okay, so let me just show you here. So this is a typical, very super simple page. So in here I have a header, then I have a navigation, then I have some links here, then I have some paragraphs, and then I have a footer. Okay, so the way I have defined this page, forget about the styling. I will explain the styles in another session. So what I have here, the way I have structured my page, I have a header tag. You can see here, this is a header tag. Within it, I have a H1 to display this welcome, and then I have a navigation bar. So the navigation bar, I am putting it inside the nav. This will work perfectly by changing this to div. So lazy developers, instead of going through whether this is a head, this is a navigation, they just use a div. But it is better if you know the role of this part of the page, you better use a more meaningful tag name. You get what I mean? So you can divide your page just by using the div tag, but it is recommended to use more meaningful tag names whenever possible. Yep. Then what I have here, I will explain this later. I have here a table. Then I have an article. You can see here, I have an article, and this article has some links. And then this article is made up of two sections. This is the first section. This is the second section. And then I have a footer here. Yep. So these, as I mentioned, these tags makes the structure of the page more meaningful, and it is highly recommended to use this particular tag names rather than using the general div. Yep. That's basically these are the tags that we use for defining the layout of the page. Is this clear? Okay. Okay. So the header element, usually it contains some, maybe the name of the organization, maybe some logo, maybe some navigation bar, as I explained. The footer, typically we put in the footer like copyright, the author, maybe some contact information, some Facebook, Twitter links, and so on. The nav bar, these are the links you will find in your web page. Aside, many pages, if you see on the web, many pages on the right, typically on the right side, they put some advertisements or some key messages that the users need to be alerted to. You can put those messages inside a tag called aside. It's something that is usually on the right side. Now, articles and section, like for example here in the example I showed you of Al Jazeera. So you can design this page using different articles. So each of these pieces that you see here is an article. Within an article, you might find sections within the article. And within the section, you might find headers and paragraphs. You get what I mean? Okay. Now, so usually a section is a part of an article, typically. So you have an article, and an article might be made up of sections. I just want to highlight one more difference. Now, there is a difference between a P and a div. A div is just a container where you can put other elements and control them as one unit. Later we will see through JavaScript, I can hide or show, I can change the color, I can change the font and so on. The paragraph, in this case, I will use it when I have a piece of content that is paragraph as we know it in the real world. It's some piece of text that has some kind of meaning, I can put it inside the P tag. So in general, I should mark up my documents in a meaningful way. If I have a tag that is more meaningful, I should use it rather than using a general one. One more example, and let you go. Here is the last example. You see here, what these links are for. These links are for the navigation of my website. I could use here, instead of using a nav, I use a div. No problem whatsoever. This will still work. Yeah, but the only thing here, it's not, the browser does not care, but it's much better and highly recommended to use a more meaningful tag rather than just using a div. That's what the key message here. So to summarize, when you are creating your document, you are basically taking each piece of the document and telling the browser what is the role of this piece in the document. Is it a navigation? Is it a paragraph? Is it a footer? Is it a table? Is it a form? And so on. And that's why we call this language a markup language. So don't use the generic tags like a div unless if you don't have any better choice. If you have a more meaningful and more precise tag name, use that instead of using the div.